Top Med Talk.
Hi, it's Monty Mythen here, Editor-in-Chief of Top Med Talk, back live from Anaesthesia 2019 here in the heart of London. I've been joined by Mike Grocott. Mike, how are you?
Very good, enjoying the meeting.
So you've been rushing around all day, yeah?
A little bit, yeah.
So what, we talked about this earlier, you're now Vice President of the Royal College, or you're going to be Vice President of the Royal College of Anaesthetists.
I will be in the autumn.
In the autumn?
Yeah.
So just been elected, so congratulations.
Along with Fiona Donald,
yeah, which we touched on that earlier on. Now, you brought a special guest along. Would you like to introduce your special guest?
So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Rupert Pearse, friend and colleague.
Familiar voice on Top Med Talk?
Yeah, who I think has got some news to share with us about a new programme.
Yeah. Oh, before you share that, Rupert, you've got some other roles in the college as well. Tell us about that.
The College of Anaesthesia?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's the Clinical Trials Network, General Mouthy.
So I have to jump in here as chair of the NIA. That is, of course, a collaboration between the college, the association, and the two journals.
Okay.
It's not a college
Let's
entity.
rewind that then. Well, okay, I see where you're coming from.
I thought that was a deliberate googly.
Yeah,
it was an inadvertent.
To give you an opportunity to explain that fact. Yeah. So, Rupert, tell us about that thing.
So, the Clinical Trials Network is, of course, been going for a few years now, but it's just starting ready for prime time, I think, in terms of building up the infrastructure of people that will deliver the clinical trials, but not just the clinical trials that are interesting academically to the people like me, but also the clinical trials that really, really matter to frontline anaesthetists and their patients, the problems that they're trying to solve on a daily basis that have been neglected for quite a while.
And it's a perioperative clinical trials network. Have I got that right?
pomctn.org.uk.
pomctn.org.uk. Now, Mike, you were quite rightly pointing out that although there's some of the elements, the physical elements of it exist within the building at the Royal College of Anaesthetists, it's a National Institute of Academic Anaesthesia collaborative endeavour. Tell us a little bit about the NIAA.
So I think this is something to be celebrated that we probably don't shout about enough. The fact that the NIAA has, over more than a decade now, brought together the college and the association and the two journals, so Anaesthesia and the BJA, along with all, or pretty much all the specialist societies, in a collaborative endeavour that is, certainly to my mind, relatively unusual. If you look across medicine, and I think relatively unusual in anaesthesia, in everybody pulling together around a common agenda, and the CTN support has been a great example of that.
And all of that overlaps in the NIA as well, with crosstalk with the so-called spec SOCs as well, doesn't it? But the four bodies you referred to were sort of founding funding partners, and therefore pump-primed the Clinical Trials Network, I think, and then very generously some other supporters who were there at the beginning have continued to fund it. Who's that, Rupert?
So we're funded by the four founding partners of the NIAA, which are the Royal College of Anaesthetists, the Association of Anaesthetists, the Anaesthesia Journal and the British Journal of Anaesthesia.
And
Rose Trees Trust, which are a charitable organisation based in the UK.
And big shout out to them for doing, because they repeated the funding.
Yes.
I think,
So all five of those funders have reinvested for the second cycle round. And I think the really nice thing about the CTN, the NIAA, if we see the NIAA as a community response for the need to make sure that we can sustainably deliver high quality research that matters to our patients. The CTN is a step beyond that to further build that infrastructure up. So it's no longer promoting infrastructure in our hospitals or in our universities, but it's promoting a shared community infrastructure that we all own. And I think that's the thing I'm really proud about. And I hope everybody's really proud of, is that we're trying to solve everybody's problems, problems that matter for the people who describe themselves, I think, as jobbing anaesthetists, they're often much more than jobbing anaesthetists, have day-to-day problems that their patients experience that could have been solved through high-quality research many years ago and haven't. And we need to queue those problems up, those questions up, and start answering them.
So if you go into the website, you'll be able to see a portfolio of ongoing trials.
That's right.
We were just interviewing Tim Cook along with Paul Wishmeyer. They were talking about emergency laparotomy, and Tim highlighted the Floella trial in that. So we've had a little bit on that. Optimise 2 is ongoing. What else is active at the moment? And what else do you need people to be aware that they should join in with?
So we're super keen to push Fluella because that is a very, very large trial that we really need to roll out in every NHS hospital in the UK. So that's a purely UK-based trial. So we're particularly keen to pick up as many patients as we can in Fluella, but also Optimise 2, which is a similar question, but in patients having elective surgery. We also have Topic 2, which is a question around paravertebral blocks for patients having a thoracotomy. We've got a trial called Allegro, which is led by surgeons who've come to us for support, which is an interesting development for us that we're seeing more widely in the perioperative sphere rather than just in the specialty of anaesthesia, and that's about lignocaine infusion for the treatment or prevention of ileus.
Yes.
And of course there's lots of other interest in lignocaine for use in cancer recurrence and so on. We've got a big program called Osiris, which I can wax lyrical about for a very long period of time.
So that's why I think we dragged you over here to actually get... We'll come back to that one. Is there anything else on the list? Because that's what we want to really dive into.
You're challenging me here to remember all 7.
We can look at
there's a trial called Inspire, which Denny Levitt leads with a team from Bristol.
It's about lung strategies.
Inspiratory muscle training, which is a big NHR-funded trial. There's a trial called Magic, which is actually run by some dentists. It's about paediatric pre-meds, which is another key trial. So there's a really lovely, diverse mixture of projects coming online.
And they're all my kind of national portfolio, so they will get, by a different route, they get government support for enrolment of patients as well.
Yeah, because they're on the so-called portfolio, they get support by the NIHR, so the National Institute of Health Research Clinical Research Network, say that the individual hospitals recruiting patients will receive funding to support that recruitment over and above any funding that comes directly from the trial itself.
Which I think was just a brilliant idea from the National Institute of Health Research. I hope that persists. Is that any wobble in that?
So I think it's going to persist. The only thing I would say is that so it's on a fixed funding envelope, and we've got, as a community nationally across all specialties, we've got better and better at recruiting, so there are more and more patients, and actually the complexity mix, they're getting more and more complex, so more and more randomised controlled trials.
And you get a bigger quantum for the more complex trials, don't you?
Which is all good, but I think the system is starting to become a little bit stretched, so we may have some tweaks. Ideally, we get a bit more money, but that may be unrealistic in the current environment, or some tweaks as to how that works. But it is an extraordinary mechanism.
If you've got a lot of trials running and you're very successful in managing your portfolio, then if anyone's listening who's sharing out the money, please don't give less. But you could see that it might be easier to manage a lower amount per patient if you're running a bigger portfolio.
Yeah, I think the challenge is around, as the portfolio gets stretched, individual R&D offices start to make basically financial decisions. So how can we get best bang for buck by doing essentially the easiest trials, which as an unintended consequence may be that the highest research priorities are not prioritised because they may be a little bit more expensive.
I mean, that's one of the strengths of the CTN, is that we can handle that on a national basis. Yes. We can make sure that the key projects are prioritised and coordinated across the whole of the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
And working together with the specialty group, the CRN specialty group, which you chair, it means that we're kind of less vulnerable to that because we're organised and we're coordinated and we're making the right arguments to the right people. I think leaves us in a stronger position to handle that problem. But we need to be more and more efficient with the way we recruit patients to these trials as time goes on, certainly.
So, if I may, because I cut you off about the one you were going to wax lyrical about, Osiris or whatever it's called.
Osiris.
Is that a word?
Osiris is, I believe, the Greek god of regeneration.
Osiris?
Every project needs a tenuous acronym.
Right, but is that right? It's Osiris.
That's right.
Okay.
Osiris.
And that is the Greek god of regeneration.
The Greek god of regeneration, the Egyptian god of
death, isn't it?
Regeneration is the word that. Some of these gods have a mixed portfolio of tasks. Regeneration is also on this one. We won't delve too deeply into the provenance of the acronym, shall we put it that way?
So Prometheus's liver being regenerated after being gnawed by the eagle on a daily basis was thanks to the god Osiris.
I think I've just stepped into a parallel universe.
What did you know about this? I think he opened Pandora's box, or did he give...
Where are we going with this?
You've been secretly Googling stuff.
I'm not. No. I happened to be in a very famous art museum recently, which it seemed to be about 10% of the art from that particular era was about men being gnawed, having their livers gnawed by eagles. But anyway, so I looked it up again. There we go.
Okay.
But I have never heard of Osiris until now. Osiris. Right, Osiris, tell us about it, Rupert, apart from...
So Osiris is a big deviation for me in that most of the while I've historically been doing single big, simple observational studies, single big clinical trials. One of the things we learn in the perioperative medicine development work we've been doing at the Royal College of Anaesthetists was that one of the big bits of feedback we got from our perioperative medicine leads was that shared decision making, which is now the standard of care for patients having surgery, is very, very challenging when you've got older patients with lots of comorbid diseases. And the panoply of risks and bad things that can happen to these patients is very hard to predict. It's very hard to counsel patients reliably when you actually aren't sure what bad things might happen to them, what the real risks are. And to deliver a good standard of shared decision-making to these patients is difficult and something that worries a lot of our clinical colleagues. It turns out that it worries a lot of our patients as well.
Right.
And it also turns out that older patients with chronic disease are, in particular, likely to make very different types of decisions to younger, fitter patients.
Yes.
Harder decisions to predict.
Yep.
So that lack of good information becomes even more important. So we started looking at this with a team at the university where I work, which is Queen Mary University of London, about how we might solve that. And bit by bit, as we started to develop a programme of work which we thought might get funded, we found more and more colleagues in different parts of our university who had something to contribute. So we now have almost 20 different scientific disciplines and professions involved, all the way from surgeons, anaesthetists, ICU doctors, all the way through to statisticians, clinical trialists, professors of ethics and law, psychologists, computer scientists, and so on. We're starting out by simply doing qualitative research, interviews, focus groups with patients, with doctors, with surgeons, anaesthetists, etc., working out.
So just pause there for a second. So if there was a sort of headline question, the principal aim in the study, what is that? Or did you not have to go down that route? Did you not have to pose?
There's a few headline questions aimed. It's a 6-year program,
okay.
but the elevator pitch would be that we're going to better understand shared decision making for this complex group, and we're going to develop an electronic app, if you will, that we can use in shared decision-making conversations to facilitate the provision of the information that we currently lack, so that when you, as a doctor, have a shared decision-making conversation with your patient, not only are you equipped with the understanding of what they want to know, but also you're equipped with the detailed epidemiological information that you can provide them in a way that they can understand it.
Gotcha.
And the hope is that will reduce the number of decisions patients then regret.
And will they go at some of that on their own? Can they? You imagine them starting that on their own at home, or you think it's going to be in front of a
I think that most of this will be as part of a combined conversation with surgeons and doctors. I think one of the most challenging things about the research will be working out when in the decision-making pathway we introduce the technology.
Mike wants to come in, but I hope you can remember where I cut you off, because I can't now. Go on, Mike.
Well, just we were talking a little bit earlier. The dissemination plan for this, I think, has been flagged up by the NHR as a real exemplar. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're quite chuffed about this, actually, because as I was saying earlier, the original concern was raised by the perioperative medicine leads for the Royal College of Anaesthetists, and during what was a very long and protracted period of securing the funding, because it went through a very, very rigorous process of review, we explained that this was a problem that doctors were seeing on the ground with their patients, and we explained that patients had that as well. What we then went on to do was show that as the Centre for Perioperative Care, which is newly launched at the Royal College of Anaesthetists this week, would be our route to disseminating the learning from the Osiris project through to patients on a day-to-day basis through the perioperative medicine leads at the Centre of Perioperative Care. And that means that we've got, over the course of the 6 years, a ready-made route to disseminate the interim learning.
Fantastic.
And to hear back from members as we go and make sure that we refine and perfect what we're doing as things evolve over time. And I think that's really great. The NHR at a national level have seen that the way in which we're doing our research, the way we're disseminating our work and making sure it changes patient care is as an exemplar for us, is a really lovely story for the college.
Can you remember where I cut you off?
You cut me off right at the very beginning when I was just beginning to talk about, I told you I'd wax lyrical, about the qualitative work. So starting out interviewing patients, interviewing doctors, finding out what really matters. So an example being that we know from critical illness and so on that people in the last year of life make very, very different decisions about things. So they're much more likely, for example, to accept a treatment that's got a very high risk of death, but much less likely to accept a treatment that's got a very high risk of survival with high burden of illness. So, if they're very disabled, if they've got cognitive impairment. So how do those observations in other patient groups map out to the surgical patient? Do we get a similar pattern or is it different? How do surgeons feel about that? How do anaesthetists feel about that? Then rolling that out into focus groups. The next area is a very, very major program of epidemiology to actually find out how the outcomes for high-risk surgical patients differ, to the point where you can map for individual specific procedures what the likely outcomes are by age, by comorbidity and so on. So you can provide a very, very patient-centred, individualised prediction of what might happen.
Now, the I think it's the Nesquik calculator, is it, the one in America?
Yeah.
Does it do that to a certain extent already?
So if you think about that, takes all surgery and all patients, and you've got a one-size-fits-all technology for low risk, for high risk, for young, for old, from anything from a hip replacement all the way through to emergency abdominal surgery, the chances of that providing a really, really accurate, individualised, what we would call forecast, like a weather forecast for our patients, is unreliable. That would be a bit like, the equivalent would be saying we could have a weather forecast for the whole of the planet that would be useful for me here in London today, when actually you're going to need an individualised weather forecast for London. But also, Mike with his fancy hairdo here, when he goes out of an evening, if it's raining, he might want to take an umbrella. Me with much less hair, I might not care about having an umbrella. So Mike's view of what the weather forecast might be and how it matters to him could be very different to how I see the weather. And so we could have the same surgery, and Mike's views about what a good and bad outcome might be could be very different. And so that's why it needs to be so individualised.
Mike, I do agree that hair's looking very interesting at the moment.
It must be the headphones.
It's not really. We just wind you up. You had a question for Rupert.
I didn't. I think I
if only the listener could see Mike's face.
You scratch your nose because you're worried about what we're saying about your hair. But your point is, if you're going to take an umbrella if you think it's going to rain.
My point is that Mike's got more hair than me. A secondary point is that even though we might seem in many ways to be quite similar people, we might be a similar age, it's very easy for us to think about how we might make very different decisions about surgery.
So the clock's against us. Do you want people to join in with that one, or is that in-house? Is that one where you're looking for centres? Or
we are definitely looking for centres for different parts of the project. Some smaller parts of the project, we've got all the centres we need. Other bigger parts of the project later down the line will need lots and lots of centres, and yes, we're interested to hear from people. And if it's not already, it will soon be on the CTM website, and we've got our own Osiris website as well.
We'll get something in the show note from this to make sure that it's traceable by people.
That would be grand.
Rupert, thank you for all the great work you do. Congratulations, it's going so well. Mike, Great hair. Thanks for your generous contribution.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I hope there's a photograph that goes with this. Just about get called back into session, so we should run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thanks, Monty. Thanks, guys.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.